Good morning, everybody. John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln on April 14 in 1865. Lincoln died the next day, but immediately after the assassination, there was a big manhunt for Booth. And it was on this date, April 26, that he was cornered and killed at a tobacco barn near Port Royal, Virginia, about 65 miles south of the capital. This is a photograph of Ford's Theater from 1865. So it's a lot different neighborhood than it is today. And one thing about it then is it had lots of alleys either side of it. So here's a portrait of John Wilkes Booth shooting President Lincoln. And after Booth shot Lincoln, he jumped onto the stage from that balcony. And here's the drawing of where Booth went. So he went from right to left and then out the back left door to a little alley where a horse was waiting for him. And this is the bridge called the 11th Street Bridge today, but this is the bridge he crossed into Maryland. It was near the Navy Yard. He got challenged by a sentry but talked his way out of it. And this is the map of the route from Ford's Theater to Virginia. So if you look at the top arrow, it says from Ford's Theater to Surratt Tavern, and this is Surratt Tavern today. So a lot of the places associated with the Booth escape are still there, and they're clearly marked as historical places. Another place he stopped was the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, pictured here, and Mudd set Booth's broken leg, because Booth had broken his leg when he jumped from the balcony onto the stage. And then from Dr. Mudd's, you can tell from this map, he went toward the Potomac River, and he hoped to go from Maryland into Virginia. And if you look on this map, you can see the word stayed in the woods, and this is the woods where Booth and his fellow conspirator David Harold stayed for 5 days. Now, why did they stay there for 5 days? Well, partly because the word had gone out that Booth was the murderer. Everybody had seen him, of course. So there were a lot of people out looking for Booth. He was a wanted man, particularly the cavalry. The cavalry were all over that part of Maryland and Virginia looking for Booth. So he had to really lay low, and he ended up being in that woods for about 5 days. Now, if you look again at the map, you can see that he crosses the Potomac and goes into Virginia. The first time he and David Harold tried to do that, they actually got lost and drifted back to the Maryland shore. But here they are crossing the Potomac. They did it at night. They almost got captured by a gunboat, but they escaped. And eventually they went to this house, the house of William Lucas. It was a log cabin. Booth and Harold actually forced these people out of the house so they could stay there. And then eventually they carried on and they came to the farm of the Garrett family, pictured here. Now, Booth had said he was suffering from a war wound, but the Garretts didn't quite believe him, and they made him and David Harold move to a tobacco barn, and this is where they were surrounded by the New York 16th Cavalry. You can see Booth on the left with his crutches. Booth was shot. He didn't die right away. He actually died on the front steps of this building, I think. And eventually at his autopsy there were many witnesses because they really wanted it clear that Booth was dead, that he hadn't survived and had gone into hiding. Now here's a picture of Booth with other conspirators. That night that Lincoln was killed, someone was supposed to kill the vice president, also the Secretary of State. These guys were arrested pretty quickly, and after a lengthy trial with lots of witnesses, they were hanged at the jail there in Washington, D.C., and here's a photograph of the conspirators being hanged, and it was photographed. And here's a book I recommend you read. It's called Manhunt by James Swanson. It's just a great story about this. It's like reading a novel. One of the most significant events after the Civil War.